Hello everyone, welcome to INCM Standard Music Notation. Today we are going to talk about extended techniques on flute. The first technique called tongue pizzicato slap. The second one, tongram, timbrel trills or bisbigliando, singing and playing, multiphonics, key slaps, key clicks, whistle sound, tone on flute. Air sounds, circular breathing, flutter tonguing, harmonics, harmonic gliss, and jutvistel. Let's start with the first technique. The first technique called tongue pizzicato or tongue piece slap. The slap tongue technique is a percussive technique commonly used in wind instruments like a flute, saxophone, and clarinet. It involves striking the reed or embouchure hole with the tongue to create a percussive sound. However, on the flute, executing the slap tongue technique is considerably more challenging due to its lack of a reed. Since the flute doesn't have the reed like the saxophone or clarinet, the slap tongue technique cannot be executed in the same manner. Instead, flutists have developed alternative percussive techniques to mimic the effect, such as the tongram or tongue stop technique. This technique involves quickly and forcefully stopping the airflow with the tongue against the embouchure hole to create a sharp percussive sound. While it's technically possible to attempt these percussive techniques in any register of the flute, they are generally more challenging to execute in the lower register due to the nature of airflow and embouchure control. However, with the practice and skill, flutists can develop proficiency in using these techniques across the flute's entire range. So let's listen to some of these techniques.
Now try to do the same on the flute using a low pitch like G.
That was a kind of how it's gonna sound like. And this is how we actually notate it on this stave. The next technique is going to be tongram. Definition of the tongram is when a flute player creates a vacuum still with a mouth tone hole, creating a tongue sound. The tongram technique, also known as a tongue stop or tongue pizzicato, is a percussive technique commonly used in flute playing. It involves the flutist momentarily interrupting the airflow by placing the tongue against the embouchure hole, creating a sharp percussive sound. While it is technically possible to execute this technique across the entire range of the flute, some registers may present more challenges due to the differences in airflow and embouchure control. Typically, executing the tongram technique in the lower register first octave of the flute may be more challenging for several reasons. In the lower register, the airflow required to produce sound is generally slower compared to the higher register. This slower airflow may make it more difficult to achieve the sudden stop necessary for the tongram technique without disrupting the sound production entirely. Maintaining proper embouchure control while executing the tongram technique is crucial. In lower register, where the embouchure may need to be more relaxed to produce lower pitches, it can be challenging to strike the right balance between relaxation and control required for percussive techniques like tongram. The lower register of the flute often requires a fuller, richer tone quality. Attempting percussive technique like tongram without compromising the overall tone quality can be more challenging in this register. However, with the practice and careful attention to technique, flutists can develop proficiency in executing the tongram technique across the entire range of the flute. Including the low register, its mate requires adjustments in airflow, embouchure, and tongue placement to achieve the desired percussive effect while maintaining control and consistency of sound production. So let's have a look in some of the sound of this technique today together. So this is actually how the tongram techniques can work. The next technique is going to be timbrel trill bisbigliando. The timbral trills is a specialized flute technique where the flutist alternates between two fingerings to create a rapid alternation in the timbre rather than pitch. The technique is more commonly associated with the lower register of the flute, particularly with the use of the B flat or B key to create the trill effect. However, it's not necessarily impossible to execute timbral trills in any particular register of the flute. Rather, the timbral trills technique might be more challenging or less effective in certain registers due to differences in fingerings, resonance, and timbral contrast between the two pitches involved in the trill. In the middle to lower register of the flute, such as the first and second octaves, there tends to be more noticeable difference in timbre between the fingerings used for the timbral trill. Additionally, these registers often provide better resonance and projection for the timbral changes to be heard clearly. In contrast, the higher register of the flute, particularly the third octave, the timbral trill may be less effective due to the closer proximity of the harmonics and the limited availability of the fingers that produce a significant timbral contrast. However, the skillful execution and experimentation flutist may find way to adopt the timbral trill technique to different register of the flute, potentially exploring alternative fingerings or adjusting embouchure and air support to enhance the timbral contrast. As with any flute technique practice, experimentation and familiarity with the instrument's capability are key to mastering the timbral trill across various registers. So, this is how we actually notate timbral trills. So let's listen to some of the timbral trills. So this is how actually the technique sounds like. So the next technique called singing and playing. In the singing and playing techniques on flute, it is really difficult to control pitch in unison and octaves. The singing and playing technique on the flute, also known as a flute singing or flute voice, involves simultaneously playing the flute and singing or humming a different pitch. This technique creates a unique sound, expanding the expressive possibilities of the instrument. While it's technically possible to attempt singing and playing on the flute in any register, some registers may present more challenges due to the differences in airflow, embouchure control, and the coordination required between playing and singing. In general, lower register notes on the flute require a slower airflow compared to the higher registers. Coordinating this airflow with pitch simultaneously can be more challenging, especially when trying to maintain both pitches with clarity and control. Playing the lower register typically involves a more relaxed embouchure compared to the higher register. This is how we actually notate this technique. Let's listen to some of this technique together.
In this technique, we play the flute and hum into the instrument at the same time. We can sing and play at the same pitch. We can also sing and play in different pitches at the same time. Oh.
Before we go through to the next technique, make sure always take into account different vocal ranges. Some composer will give different versions for different voice type. Other just indicate that it is okay to sing in whichever octave is comfortable for you, for your voice. So make sure that's absolutely has to be in the right kind of type of range of voice. So the next technique is going to be multiphonics. The definition of multiphonics when a player splits the air stream so that it hits the notes in both the fundamental range and harmonic range at the same time, or two different harmonic ranges. This happens when one uses a forked or vented fingering that allows the note to split into more than one register. As a result, playing multiphonics using the lowest notes of the flute register are not possible. Always put your desired multiphonic fingerings in the part. Please do not just write the notes you want and expect the performer to find a fingering that will produce those pitches. Generally, if you are writing multiphonics into your music, I recommend testing them with the performer to make sure they work as you intend, as many multiphonics merely approximate the written pitches, are quite quiet and are unpredictable. So, multiphonics on the flute involves producing more than one pitch simultaneously by manipulating the measure and airflow. While multiphonics can theoretically be attempted across all registers of the flute, it's generally more challenging to execute in the low register first and second octaves due to the several factors. Achieving multiphonics require precise control over airflow and embouchure. In the lower register, where the airflow is typically slower and the embouchure may be more relaxed to produce lower pitches, it can be more difficult to maintain the necessary control for multiphonics without disrupting the sound entirely. Multiphonics in the lower register may be less clear and distinct compared to the higher register due to the nature of the flute's tone production. The richer, fuller tone quality of the lower register may make it more challenging to separate and identify individual pitches within the multiphonic sound. Finding fingerings that facilitate multiphonics in the lower register can be more challenging compared to the higher register. However, multiphonics may be more challenging in the lower register. They are not necessarily impossible with experimentation, practice, and careful attention to technique. Flutists can develop proficiency in executing multiphonics across all registers of the flutes. As with any extended flute technique, consistent practice and exploration are essential for mastering multiphonics across the flute's entire range. So this is how we actually notate. We write the fingers in the top of the stave in order to show which fingers is suitable for the performer to play the multiphonics. So let's listen to some of these techniques together. So this is how actually the sound of multiphonics it works. Actually this one was with the trill as well. So it was trill and multiphonics together, which sounds absolutely beautiful. The next technique is going to be key clicks. The key clicks, also known as a mechanical percussion or key percussion, involves striking the keys of the flute to produce percussive sounds. This technique can be executed across all registers of the flute, but it might be more challenging in the lower register, first and second octaves, for several reasons. In the lower register, the finger holes of the flute are larger, and the fingers need to cover a wider area to produce the desired pitches. This wider finger spacing can make it more challenging to execute precise and controlled key clicks. The keys in the lower register are generally larger and require more effort to depress fully. This increased resistance may affect the speed and ease of executing key clicks, as the flutists need to exert more force to produce the desired percussive sound. Achieving a clear and resonant tone in the lower register often requires a more relaxed embouchure and slower airflow. Coordinating the key clicks with the necessary embouchure adjustments for the tone production can be more challenging. Despite these challenges, it's still possible to perform key clicks in the low register with practice and careful technique refinement. Flutists may need to develop finger strength, coordination, and timing to execute key clicks effectively, while maintaining control over tone production. As with any flute technique, consistent practice and experimentation are crucial for mastering key clicks across the entire range of the flute. So this is actually how we notate the key clicks. And like before, let's listen to sound of it.
You can choose any key you like to get a percussive effect. For example, if you have to play a key click on D, you can use any finger. If you use your fourth finger of your right hand, it is more difficult than using the fourth finger of your left hand because of the balance. If you cover the embouchure hole, you can change the pitch, like this.
So this was how actually key clicks works, and the sound of it was absolutely nice and beautiful. The next technique is going to be whistle sound or whistle tone on flute. So the whistle sound technique on the flute doesn't have the standard notation, as it's more of an extended technique rather than conventional note. Composer might use text instructions such as whistle tone, overblow, or harmonic. These instructions would typically appear above the stave or in the performance notes. Some composers use graphic symbols or diagrams to represent extended techniques like the whistle sound. These symbols might resemble a small whistle or an arrow pointing upward, indicating to the performer to overblow or produce the desired effect. In more contemporary or experimental music, composers might use specialized notation systems for extended techniques. These notations could include specific symbols or diagrams unique to the composer or notation system. In some cases, especially in improvised or experimental music settings, performers might be given verbal instructions by the composer or conductor on when and how to produce the whistle sound. It's essential for performers to communicate with composer or arrangers if they encounter on conventional notation or instructions to ensure they understand the composer's intentions and can execute the desired effects accurately. Additionally, performers may experiment and develop their own methods for producing whistle sounds on flute, which may not always align with traditional notation practices, are very quiet and very difficult to control. I have rarely found that these give a composer what they want, as they are almost always inaudible in the context which someone writes them in. In the flute instrument, it's generally more challenging to produce a whistle sound in the lower register or first octave compared to the higher register or second or third octaves. In the lower register of the flute, the airflow and embouchure are typically adjusted to produce lower pitches, which makes it more difficult to achieving the required airflow and embouchure adjustments for the whistle sound. In contrast, the higher register of the flute naturally lends itself to producing the whistle sound more easily because the embouchure and airflow adjustments for overblowing are more compatible with the flute's natural tendencies in that register. However, with a practice and a skill, it's possible to produce whistle sound in any register of the flute. It often requires precise control of the embouchure, airflow, and finger placement to achieve the desired effect. Let's listen to some of the whistle sound then. This is how it is, the whistle sound effect on the flute. The next technique is going to be air sound. This is how we actually notate the air sound on the stave. We can have it with a no pitch, like this, with the half of the pitch, and with the airy pitch. So it depends on the composer what kind of technique he wants to achieve. So let's talk about the air sounds. The air sounds are some of the most effective extended techniques on the flute and encompass a lot of different types of sound that can be created by both shaping the mouth using different syllables and altering the direction and amount of air that enters the tube. I recommend that if you are writing for the flute and want to use air sounds, make yourself a PVC pipe flute or buy a cheap metal $100 student level instrument which is available on eBay. And figure out what works, doesn't work by testing things out yourself. There are many air sound possibilities and you will be able to write down what you want if you can achieve it yourself. You don't have to make a true sound on the flute in order to make an air sound. Full air syllabic air sounds will have residual pitch, but no real pitch. Hard consonants work really well here, especially if you want a hard articulation like che, she, ke, pe, te, shu. Open vowels are harder but can produce soft attacks. These often have to have some sort of S involves that helps to keep the air dirty. Half pitch and half sound. This can be accomplished at varying degrees of severity. Basically, it's the same ideas as listening to the beginner or saxophone doublers on the flute. You keep your lip muscles loose enough that the sound gets muddy and airy. This can be hard for professional flute players to do because they have literally spent years trying to get the air out of their sound. It is also quite difficult and sometimes impossible to do in the second and third octave because the loose embouchure will mean that the pitch will not have enough air speed to get to the second and the third octaves. In the flute, producing air sounds also known as a breathy or airy sounds, is generally easier to lower register compared to the higher register. This is because the lower register of the flute requires less precise control of the airspeed and pressure compared to the higher register. In the higher register, especially in the third octave and beyond, it can be more challenging to produce air sounds intentionally. This is due to the fact that playing in the higher register requires tighter embouchure control and a faster air stream to produce clear, focused tones. However, with practice and experimentation, flutists can still achieve air sound in the higher register. So let's listen to some of air sound technique on flute.
I'll show now the difference in embouchure between a focused playing sound and an air sound. First, in the low register. And now, in the middle register. And in the high register. A little bit more difficult to control, as you see.
It's going to be really difficult in different various registers, so you have to be careful when you write some airy sound. You should think about which register you want to choose for the performer. So let's go to the next technique, which is going to be circular breathing. Circular breathing has been used since the earliest days of the flute by John Sebastian Bach's Allemande from his solo flute partita was apparently circular breathed in 1780. It is still not a technique that is required of flute players. In fact, I would argue that only 5% of the flute players at most know how to circular breathe. I would say it is a good rule to not write a piece that requires circular breathing unless you are working with a flutist who can circular breathe. This is very important because circular breathing cannot be done on all notes or all instances. So let's listen to some of the circular breathing together. Yeah, this is how actually circular breathing techniques work on flute. The next technique is going to be flutter tongue. This is how we actually notate the flutter tongue on the stave. It's so similar to tremolo on a strings, and make sure to write the flutter tongue technique on the above for the performer to have better understanding and performance. The flutter tongue technique on the flute involves the rapid fluttering of the tongue against the roof of the mouth while blowing air into the flute, creating a fluttering or rolling effect. While it's technically possible to attempt flutter tongue technique in any register of the flute, some registers may present more challenges due to the differences in airflow, embouchure control, and resonance. In general, executing flutter tongue in the low register first and second octave of the flute may be more challenging for several reasons. Lower register notes on the flute require a slower airflow compared to the higher register. Coordinating the fluttering tongue motion with a slower airflow in the lower register can be more difficult, as the fluttering motion needs to be fast enough to produce the desired effect without disrupting the airflow necessary for sound production. Achieving and maintaining proper embouchure control is crucial for executing flutter tongue effectively. In the lower register, where the embouchure may need to be more relaxed to produce lower pitches, it can be more challenging to balance the airflow required for flute playing with the fluttering motion of the tongue. The low register of the flute often requires a fuller, richer tone quality, coordinating the flutter tongue technique while maintaining the desired tone quality can be more challenging in this register, as the fluttering motion may affect the stability and clarity of the sound. However, with practice and patience, flutists can develop proficiency in executing flutter technique across all registers of the flute. It may require experimenting with the different tongue positions, airflow adjustments, and embouchure techniques to achieve the desired flutter effect while maintaining control and consistency of the sound production. As with any flute technique, consistent practice and exploration are essential for mastering flutter technique across the flute's entire range. So let's listen to some of the flutter technique.
There's two types of flutter tonguing. The first one, the most used one, is the throat one. It's a bit like gargling in your flute. You can start by taking water and going like this, and then with no water, like I just did. Maybe it helps sometimes in the beginning to put your head this way. Move your head. Then you do it in your flute while you're blowing. You can try it like this, just blowing and doing the like I'm doing right now. I'm blowing and rolling my R in my throat. And when you start in your flute, start with the low register because it's way easier. So let's say on a low D. Then when you're comfortable with it, you can go higher. It's used sometimes as an extended technique like this, where you completely cover the whole of the flute like this with your mouth, and then you move the fingers to give it a... But I'll just do it on one note like this. You can do it while moving fingers. And it's an interesting effect.
So this is actually how we have the flutter tongue. Okay, so the next technique is going to be harmonics. Harmonics can give some of the most beautiful colors on the flute, but it would reverse them for solo pieces or quiet moments in an ensemble piece, as they are often weaker in the sound than regular notes. Harmonics on the flutes involve producing higher overtones of the fundamental pitch by altering an air streaming and embouchure. While it is technically possible to attempt harmonics in any register of the flute, some registers may present more challenges due to the differences in embouchure control, air streaming direction, and tone production. In general, executing harmonics in the lower register first and second octaves of the flute may be more challenging for several reasons. Achieving and maintaining the correct embouchure shape and air pressure is crucial for producing harmonics. In the lower register, where the embouchure may need to be more relaxed to produce lower pitches, it can be more challenging to control the embouchure precisely for harmonics without losing focus or stability in the sound. Producing harmonics often requires directing the airstream more towards the edge of the embouchure hole to exceed the higher overtones. In the low register, where embouchure hole is larger and airstream may naturally be directed more centrally, it can be more difficult to adjust the airstream direction accurately for harmonics. In this register, as the adjustment of embouchure and airstream for harmonics may affect the stability and clarity of the sound. However, with practice and patience, flutists can develop proficiency in executing harmonics across all registers of the flute. It may require experimenting with different embouchure shapes, airstream directions, and fingerings to achieve the desired harmonic series while maintaining control and consistency of the sound production. As with any flute technique, consistent practice and exploration are essential for mastering harmonics across the flute's entire range. This is some kind of possible harmonics on the flute, and this is how we actually notate the harmonics on the flute. So let's listen to harmonic techniques on flute.
There are two ways of performing harmonics. The first possibility is just increase the airstream to get the next harmonic. With the second possibility, you have to use the resonance space of your mouth. For example, play a low C and start with O. Then try to get the next harmonic by doing OI, O-I.
So this is actually how the harmonics work on flute, and the final one is jeu de pistol. The jeu de pistol technique on the flute typically involves creating a high-pitched, airy sound by directing a focused stream of the air across the embouchure hole at a particular angle. This technique is generally more feasible in the higher register of the flute, particularly in the third octave and beyond. In the low register of the flute, it can be more challenging to produce a clear jeu de pistol sound due to the larger size of the embouchure hole and nature of airflow in those registers. However, skilled flutists can still experiment with the technique in the lower registers and may achieve varying degrees of success depending on factors such as embouchure control, airspeed, and angle of the airstream. This is how we actually notate the jeu de pistol with glissando. So let's listen to some of these techniques.
Vocalization is important. Use O, I, OI. It is also possible to start the jet whistle softly, like this. You can influence the pitch and the timbre by turning in and outwards the flute.
Okay guys, thank you very much for watching this video today. That was all about the extended techniques today, and I hope you like it. Please make sure to subscribe my channel for next video. Thank you very much.